On behalf of the motion picture industry, welcome to the world of home video entertainment.
Okay, so another car review of a movie. I didn't want to do this, but I've been thinking about this movie all weekend. It's just been rolling around in my head. The Killing of America, a 1981 shockumentary, documentary, Faces of Death type movie, whatever you want to call it. Never released on home video in the United States officially, but Severin Films have released it on Blu-ray. They released it in late 2016 on Blu-ray. It just kind of snuck out, and I only just recently got my copy. I don't know, something happened. It got lost in the mail or something. I mean, I kind of forgot about it, and it was like a disappointment because I've watched this movie over and over the years. I loved it so much, and I wanted to watch it on Blu-ray. And I almost just kind of put it out of my head. You know, I didn't follow up, kind of my fault. But on my doorstep a few days ago, what appears but a package from Severin Films with the Blu-ray for The Killing of America. So now I can finally review it, and everything is right in the world. Oh my God. The Blu-ray package is great. And this movie is very little known. It's not well known. It's very obscure, especially in the United States. And it's a great film. It's a documentary about violence in America. That's pretty much it. Violence everywhere from, you know, spree killing, serial killers, political assassins, all of that stuff. Just a kind of a treatise, a documentary on our history of violence as America, as a culture. And it's not really that radically left-wing. It's more about a violent culture, a violent soul. You know, I mean, the film was written and produced by Paul Schrader's brother, Leonard Schrader. You know, there was the Schrader brothers, Paul Schrader and Leonard Schrader. It was produced by Leonard Schrader and his wife, Chieko Schrader, Japanese. Leonard Schrader had lived in Japan for a number of years, and he had ties to the Japanese film industry. And there was this representative from this Japanese film company, Toho Toa, Mata-Ishiro Yamamoto, who produced a lot of really well-known anime films and other stuff. And Yamamoto went to the U.S. and he was just stunned by the amount of crime stuff that he'd see on the nightly news. He'd see these shootouts and shootings and all kinds of stuff. And so I think this sparked interest in his mind, and then Leonard Schrader got involved, and his wife Chieko Schrader got involved. And what they wanted to do, I think, at the beginning was kind of do a high-end Faces of Death. You know, Faces of Death was produced by the Japanese, and they were trying to do this very high-end kind of version of Faces of Death about violence in America. And they hired this guy, this director, Sheldon Renan, who was like a film archivist. And he was able to put together and collect all of this vintage, very rare film footage of all kinds of stuff. You know, everything, the history of the late 20th century violence, everything from race riots, Charles Manson, the George Wallace's assassination, all that type of stuff. So The Killing of America starts off with this aerial footage of Los Angeles at night, an urban skyline of fear, where we hear the sirens and the radio, the police radio. We follow the police on shootouts and confrontations with criminals and people in their house, home invasions, all this type of stuff. And then we also see the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles on Halloween. They shot in Halloween, and so there's all these kind of weird, crazy characters. Reminds me of the beginning of Vice Squad, actually. And from there, we jump into it wasn't always this violent. We jumped to the idyllic America of the 40s and the 50s, and then we head into the 60s and the early 60s, and we head straight into the Kennedy assassination. We go to Dallas. They see all of this really vintage documentary footage of Dallas, the parade through Dallas and onto Elm and into Dealey Plaza, and then we see, this is this film, Killing of America, 1981, the Zapruder film. Then they optically attempted to restore and stabilize the Zapruder film. So this was still very, the Zapruder film was hidden for years, by Time Life. So this again was one of the first rare appearances of this film in any form. In 1980, I think Geraldo a few years ago in the late 70s had premiered it on one of his news programs or something. But this was still very rare footage, and we have rare footage of Parkland Hospital. The famous footage where the representative said the president got shot in the head right here. Where he, talks about this. They go into Oswald. They go into the conspiracy a little bit, but the film kind of the idea. One of the themes running through this film is that the Kennedy assassination broke apart something inside of the American consciousness, and it let loose this kind of a spirit of violence in our culture. And so the film then moves into this escalation of violence of Vietnam, of Manson, of Jim Jones, political assassinations. They cover Sirhan and Robert F. Kennedy, George Wallace and Arthur Bremer, and then later on John Hinckley and Reagan, and wonderfully displayed with this documentary footage. They talk about serial killers like Manson, or kind of mass killers like Manson and Jim Jones. There's a feature on Jim Jones. And there's all kinds of stuff. It's just the film. It feels like it's just such a long movie and goes so in depth into the subject matter, and it's just so well done, so well made. It feels almost criminal to compare this film to A Faces of Death, because it's like comparing like a fine steakhouse to McDonald's. It's such a high-end, such a well-made film, and it really feels like a film that could only have been made by someone like Paul Schrader's brother, Leonard Schrader. Paul Schrader and Leonard Schrader, they come from a really heavy, deeply religious background, and they were Dutch Calvinists, raised, and they were told that they would go to hell if they watched the movie. I don't know if you go to hell if you watch movies, because I thought the Dutch Calvinist was supposed to be the pre-elect, that it doesn't matter whatever you do, you're going to, because you're on a scroll, you're on a list. Nevertheless, they came from a very orthodox, very straight-end household full of religion and violence and anger, and out of that household, we have with Paul Schrader films like Taxi Driver and that type of stuff. Taxi Driver was based on the writings of this guy Arthur Bremer, who assassinated George Wallace. George Wallace was a Southern politician, and he was very very controversial because he was very, he wanted to kind of take things back in the South of a few years. He was very regressive and racial. And this guy Arthur Bremer, he was doing he was campaigning for a president election, and this guy Arthur Bremer shot him and paralyzed him, and he died a few years ago, 5-10 years ago. But he was paralyzed for the rest of his life, and had to give it the the election, had to give it up, the campaign. And so then the theory in the film now, political campaigns are now being decided by assassins, you know. And so, you know, you go through spree killers. There's a whole section on spree killers, which is, you never really remember these names. The young girl who shot people outside of her house, and when they asked her why she did it, she said, "I don't like Mondays." The Black Panther guys who got on top of a hotel, a Sheridan, or Howard Johnson's rather, and started just shooting people and burning up the hotel. You know, there are all kinds of incidents and occurrences in this film. Stuff you've never really heard of, stuff that was just happening in the early 80s, because crime levels in the early 80s, especially in the major urban cities, especially in the Northeast, in the New York area, they were exploding. The violence was just exploding. And so this film is a kind of a document of this, and a lot of these, some, of course, Manson and you know, of course, Martin Luther and JFK assassinations and all this, that's fair, that's part of history. But, you know, a lot of these little, you know, like this, there's a serial killer guy who shaved off half of the hair on his face, and he killed this family. And the film starts off with this guy who was on the street who's shooting people, and the police just gunned him down on the street. And there's this documentary footage of him on the street just being shot and blown. I mean, it's really excessive and violent, but it seems like it has a point. It seems like it's shining a light on this kind of darkness that is part of our culture, and again, it's shining this light in not this judgmental political kind of like left wing. Oh, we need to do this. I mean, there is a series. There is a moment in the film where it talks about guns. How everyone, you know, we have so many guns in the United States. It's like we have 2 per person. It's just explosive and gigantic. But it doesn't feel like this very, you know, it's not like a modern documentary where you feel like somebody's trying to sell you a political agenda, you know, behind the scenes. This film feels very honest, and it feels like it's trying to portray what's going on and what's going on in society and what's going on in culture. It's trying to do that in a very direct, honest way by shining a light on these types of things. A lot of the serial killer Dean Corll. This is the first time I learned about the scene. Dean Corll and Wayne Henley Jr., I believe his name. Houston. Dean Corll was a guy who murdered these young kids. He strapped them to this board in his house, and he had this guy, Wayne Henley, this young kid, and Wayne Henley basically brought Dean Corll the bodies, basically brought the victims, all of his childhood friends in his neighborhood, brought them to this guy, Dean Corll, to be murdered. And eventually, Dean Corll tried to murder Wayne Henley, and he killed him. And that whole thing, and the exploration of that, they go through that a lot, and a lot of very well shot, very well done. I mean, there's a lot of archive footage in this stuff that you've never seen anywhere else. It's new stuff. This is not an also ran. This documentary is just, there's stuff in this thing that you've not seen anywhere else. It's incredible. But they did actually shoot footage. They went and followed policemen, followed cops, and on shootouts and stuff, where they were going to somebody's house, as I was saying earlier. And they had a lot of really talented cameramen. One guy who worked on this guy was this guy, Willie Courant, who shot a lot of Godard's film. He worked in war zones. He actually shot footage, and he'd done a lot of work in war zones, and he knew exactly how to get into people's faces with the cameras, and so there's a lot of talent and in technical proficiency and superiority that was really brought to this film. Again, this is not some low-end Mondo documentary, Faces of Death, really cheap cash out. There's a lot of of, really good, unique footage in this film that's just incredible. This has almost so much I can barely even talk about it on a video. The serial killer, Ted Bundy, they talk about Ted Bundy and his trial, and there's a lot of footage of his trial. At the very end of the trial, when the judge says, the judge at the end of the trial, when he was sentencing him to death, was saying, like, it's a waste, son. You're a very bright man. I would have loved to have you practice law in my courtroom, but you went another way. He says, take care of yourself, partner. It's just beautiful, beautiful stuff. You don't really see this in a Dateline NBC. You don't see it in this in a very pre-processed network television type of thing. Even though they do have like shows on true crime and stuff, you just don't see stuff like this. This is something a little bit different. This is something a little more raw and real. And because they were trying to make this into a real feature film, they were doing something really. They thought they could make something really serious, and going after almost an Academy Award or something on that level. They're working on a very high level in this movie. So the serial killer kind of, area portion kind of rounds out the end of the film, and it pretty much ends with the serial killer part ends with a really in-depth interview with Ed Kemper. Ed Kemper, who was a really mentally disturbed guy who ended up picking up women and murdering them, and then eventually cutting off their heads and doing weird stuff with their heads, and then murdering his mother. And like using his mother's severed head for dart practice and stuff like. There's a movie, Ed Kemper movie from a few years ago, but it's an embarrassment. It has nothing to do with like Ed Kemper. It's like you make an Avengers movie and then you title it Ted Bundy, and that's a Ted Bundy movie. No, that movie was embarrassing. That was ridiculous, The film ends with John Lennon's assassination, because about 2/3 through the making of this movie, John Lennon was assassinated, and so they flew out to New York and they filmed the John Lennon Memorial in Central Park, the gigantic memorial where they played his music and they had the moments of silence, and so the film kind of ends in that place of great tragedy and mourning. I can imagine making this movie about violence, and so you're doing, you're thinking like 24 hours a day, like violence in America, and then one of the great musicians of our era, John Lennon, is struck down by an assassin. That I bet that would have been like freaky. I bet that would have been like crazy. So, according to the director, Sheldon Renan, he really wanted very badly to document what was going on 35mm, because he never saw any other 35mm film cameras. They were all video. He knew video would break down. He wanted to create a film document of the memorial, and he did, and it ends in a rather low area. Very symbolic, American flag, black and white, freeze frame, end of show. So a great movie, and the Blu-ray, the Severin Films Blu-ray is beautiful. They have remastered. I mean, this film is a mix of 16 and 35 and video format, but they've gone back to the negative. And it's really great. I mean, for years this film has only existed in the U.S. at least on VHS bootlegs and random places. But the film looks beautiful. There's interviews with the editor Lee Percy and Sheldon Renan, the director, which are very in depth. And there's a great commentary track with the director Sheldon Renan. It's a shame that more documentaries do not have special editions with like commentary tracks on them. I think the idea, many people feel that like documentaries, because a lot of it is like already voiceover, and I think there's a feeling that that you shouldn't do commentary tracks on documentaries or something, which I think it's horrible. I think some of the most interesting commentary tracks that I've ever listened to were on documentaries, because they're very technically oriented, and documentary filmmakers, I think more than any other filmmakers, they're thinking about style and structure and even character, really character, more so than any other filmmakers, because unlike a dramatic film where you're working with actors and you're working with there's a lot of other collaborators. In a documentary film, you're really having to think acutely about structure and creating structure from the materials that you have. So Sheldon Renan, who is an archivist, speaks nonstop through this commentary track. I mean, I almost couldn't. I had to keep rewinding it and listening, because the details and the level of detail that he gives in this commentary track is very much unlike any commentary track I've recently heard. It's an incredible commentary track. Anything you want to know about the film, the making of the film, how he acquired the footage, the whole process of that is, he's not as detail oriented as if he'd given the commentary track in like 1981. I mean, I'm sure, it's like, 35 years, since, the film was made. So, but otherwise, it really is, though, surprising how much he remembers about the film and how much he brings it to light. So, a really, 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 really good special edition. The mystery of the film for me is why was the film never released in the U.S.? It was only theatrically. This theater guy, Joe Papp, showed it, I guess in the New York area or Chicago or something. I forgot, but it did play in one theater for a period of time, but never on video. In Europe, in Europe and Australia and roadshow video was released on VHS. Japan. I guess there was something about, because it was a Japanese production, Japanese production companies, Japanese movie industry is very unusual. They think a lot about face and honor and culture, and that was one of the, and also this Blu-ray is great because you have the U.S. version of the film, and then there was an alternate Japanese version of the film where unlike the U.S., which just starts with darkness, it starts with America the Violent. The Japanese version starts off with like happy people. They shot this additional footage of like happy people like throwing around frisbees and like, oh, America's a great place, but it's also violent. So there's like the Japanese version is actually like a little bit happier because from a cultural standpoint, they didn't want to portray America as this completely, totally violent place. So you have that and the narration, the guy who does the narration in this film, it's incredible. You will watch this movie, and you better watch out. Don't watch it too late at night because you'll get spooked. You'll start to double check that your doors on your house are locked because you're like, oh my God, I'm living in America. This place is violent. This place is off the chain. This is off the hook violence. It really does freak you out and scare you. So I hope I've convinced you that you need to watch it. Oh, it's on. If you have Amazon Prime, you need to watch it right now because it's available for free on Amazon Prime. Go and watch it now, and then buy the Severin Films Blu-ray. And if you're a fan of true crime, if you're a fan of documentaries, if you're a fan of like reality, like real stuff, like real good in-depth documentaries, this is one of the best documentaries that I've ever seen. I learned about it when I read that book, Killing for Culture, that shockumentary death film book, and it eventually was able to track down a copy, and it blew my mind away when I watched it. It's I guess the Japanese wanted to keep it out of the U.S. market. I guess for some reason, who knows? But in any case, The Killing of America, great movie.